Of course.
Hi, and welcome to College Planning Untangled, where we help families simplify the college planning process. I'm Kristin Clark. I'm a career exploration coach, and I'm here with Bobby Hood, our SAT and ACT expert. Bobby, right on cue. You know, we got the guys outside my window doing
Of course. It's that time of year, all the landscaping and everything now that it's hot.
Yes. So today we're going to talk about the enhanced ACT and what you found out about that. I know we've been trying to figure this out.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the first enhanced ACT was last month in April, and we talked briefly about it a few weeks ago. But now finally scores came out from that first test, and also they have released the new revised ACT Red Book, which is the ACT official practice guide. And so it has 4 tests for the new digital ACT, which is, I mean, this book has paper tests, but then also there's a link where you can go and use real tests. So basically, so I had been advising my students, hey, we don't know anything about this new enhanced ACT. They just said that it's shorter, right? But otherwise, there was only just one sample test online. So I had advised a lot of my students to stick with paper until we knew more about it. But some of my students did end up taking the enhanced ACT. And the really good news is that of the only 2 students of mine that did take the enhanced ACT, both scored a 35 on it. And with 36 being a perfect score, 35s, I only have a few students a year who get 35s. I actually have a lot who get 34s, right? But so the two of my top students scoring a perfect or a near perfect score like that on this test tells me a lot about what I need to know. And so I discussed with them what they had to say, and they said basically that the test seemed a little bit easier because it was shorter, and that the math seemed a little different, and that everything else felt almost exactly the same. There were just fewer questions. And so that was one of my concerns, was like, if you shorten the number of questions on the test, in the past, you could miss 1 or 2 questions and still score a 35 or even a 36 on some of the sections. Go ahead.
Bobby, are these kids ones that you would have expected to get a 35 anyway, or?
Yeah, a 34 or a 35, right? They were really hoping to score a 35, but their scores on practice tests had sometimes been 34s. And so it was one of those things where, I knew that they absolutely had the skill to do it. And I was just very worried that on this enhanced test that, if they missed 1 or 2 questions, that might knock them down to a 34. And apparently that it didn't, right? And so that's the first thing to report, which is based on what they said, that it's not that they did fulfill their promise so far, which is that the test is basically exactly the same as it's been for 20 years. It is just shorter. And the online format did not make it any harder. They were able to deal with all of that, right? So the other thing I have basically reported, so they released these books of new tests. And so I've gone through them, and the new tests aren't new. What they did is they took just 4 real ACTs from 4 or 5 years ago, and then just cut questions out of them to make them into tests, for the new test, which is not really the best practice, but it does give us a lot of information about what they're doing.
Yes.
Right.
Well, but it sounds like the enhanced test, there's less concern about that as far as it just being much harder to do, all those good things. So that's good news.
Right, exactly. Because the SAT, when it went digital last year, the math became way, 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 way harder because they allow that Desmos online calculator on the test, right? And so anyway, here's what I see on this newer test is what they did is, so you take an ACT test from a few years ago, you just literally photocopy it, right? Science remained exactly the same number of questions, nothing changed at all. Reading, they went from 40 questions to 36 questions, and literally all they did was cut 1 or 2, 1 question from each of the for reading passages. So there are 4 reading passages. But so it's the same test. So, but I mean, the questions are identical. So that means preparing using the existing ACT practice tests completely effective because it's exactly the same thing, just 4 questions.
All right.
Math is where things got really interesting. In math, they went from 60 questions to 45 questions. So that's removing 1/4 of the questions. And it appears that what they did is they took out some of the weirder algebra and geometry questions. And so as a result, the test before was 1/3 algebra, 1/3 geometry, 1/3 arithmetic. Now it's 50% arithmetic. So averages, mean, median, mode, 25% algebra. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then 25% algebra, 25% geometry. So I think students will like that a little better because they never like the geometry questions because geometry is usually the course that they took, the longest to go, and so they've forgotten it the most. And then the English test, they also made some changes. It went from 75 questions to 45 questions. So they're removing 50 questions. So they removed 25. So they removed 1/3 of the test. And so I went through, and all they've done is they took an existing real test and they just took out an assortment of questions, but not of any particular type. All the question types are still there. And they rewrote the way they present some of the questions so that now it's a lot clearer what the question is asking you to do. The way the ACT was forever on English is they underline part of a sentence and you just pick the best answer of the different things, but it didn't ask you any question. It just gave you 4 options and you just pick the one that's best. And now all of the questions actually ask questions. And so the question tells you, the main question they ask is, which of these is grammatically correct? And I've always said, remember that there are just 13 rules to follow on the ACT. And it was 8 grammar rules and then 5 questions they ask. And what they did now is they moved it down to just 5 grammar rules. And then there are 8 questions that they ask now. And so it used to be that you had to tell students had to realize that you had to follow 8 grammar rules. Is the punctuation correct? Is subject-verb agreement correct? Are pronouns used correctly? But then the last rule was, if everything else is fine, pick the shortest answer. You remember me talking about this? This is so strange. It's just like, but that's not a grammar rule. Just pick the shortest answer, right? But that was this pattern on the test. Now what they've done is they've taken all those questions where you're supposed to pick the shortest answer, and they now made an actual question that they ask that says, which of the following is least redundant? As in least repetitive.
Right.
Well, now you know what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to pick the one that's not repetitive. Okay, now those questions, you don't have to know, just pick the shortest answer. It's like, well, when they tell you not to be redundant, pick the shortest answer.
So, Bobby, It sounds like all of this got easier.
So I can absolutely confirm that this test it is significantly easier. And the only thing that's going to intimidate students now, because traditionally the thing that intimidated students about the ACT was time pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the thing is they didn't just cut questions out. They cut more questions out than they did time. So it is less time pressure. But the other thing they did, the new thing that's going to intimidate students is in math, when they removed 15 of the questions from math, they took out more easy questions than they did medium and hard questions. And so the test now ramps up in difficulty a lot faster. And so you're going to feel overwhelmed sooner in the math section, but that will adjust in the scoring scale. It's just a harder test, right? And it's only 45 minutes, so it's just less time to suffer, But anyway, that's it. So I think it's all very, very good news. I encourage students to consider the ACT enhanced and not worry about it. Don't worry about whether you take the paper with enhanced. That's it. We'll report back more as we know more.
All right. I appreciate you looking into it, Bobby.
All right. See you next